I have $5 left, and my daughter needs medicine." The words tore out of Mia Reynolds before she could stop them, whispered into the freezing rain at 3:22 in the morning behind the Crescent Hotel's industrial kitchen. Steam rose from the dumpsters in billowing clouds, dissipating into the 40-degree air like ghosts abandoning a burial ground. Her maid uniform clung to her in wet, grey strips. Her hands, raw and bleeding from 14 hours of scrubbing floors on knees that no longer bent without pain, pulled a black trash bag toward her, fingers trembling as she searched through discarded plates and crumpled napkins. A half-eaten chicken breast wrapped in plastic. She wiped it on her uniform and bit into cold meat, eyes squeezed shut against the shame that burned hotter than any hunger. In her coat pocket, the crumpled foreclosure notice crinkled with every breath she took. $125,000. 3 days. After that, the bank would own the apartment where Emma slept, where her daughter's asthma inhaler sat on the nightstand, where 5 years of survival had taken root in the only walls that had ever held them. Mia was 28 years old but looked closer to 40. Her dark hair, once thick and glossy, hung limp and graying at the temples. Her eyes, brown, sharp, still defiant despite everything, had learned to look away when people stared at the bruises that never fully disappeared. The bruises from Douglas Hale, her manager, when he thought no one was watching. When his hands moved faster than his apologies. The flickering yellow security light above the loading dock cast everything in sickly amber. Mia sat on her heels, her black work shoes soaked through, and pulled another item from the trash. A dinner roll, barely bitten. She held it in her palm like a prayer. "Just get through today," she whispered to herself. Get through today, get to the pharmacy, get Emma's refill, figure out the rest tomorrow. Tomorrow never came with solutions. It only came with more hours at the hotel, more floors to scrub, more tips that Douglas Hale would skim into his own pocket with one hand while his other hand grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave marks. Sophie Langford, the hotel's owner, watched from her third-floor office window sometimes. Watched Mia on bleeding knees scrubbing marble that cost more than Mia's car. Watched and never once stepped in to stop it. No one stepped in. No one ever did. The rain intensified, drumming against the loading dock with increasing fury. Mia heard it before she heard the engines, a sound like distant thunder rolling closer, growing louder, becoming undeniable. She looked up. 3 black SUVs rolled into the alley, their headlights flooding the space in white light so bright it erased all shadow. Their engines purred with the kind of mechanical precision that only came with millions of dollars and absolute control. The vehicles moved in perfect formation, like a military operation, like an invasion. Mia froze. The half-eaten chicken breast still in her hand. Her knee still bent, still filthy, still bleeding through the grey fabric of her uniform. The back door of the center vehicle opened. A man stepped out into the rain without hesitation, without adjusting his coat, like water was something that would not dare to touch him. Nicholas Calabrese was 6 feet 3 inches tall, with broad shoulders that filled the black Armani suit like it had been sculpted specifically to contain him. His features were sharp, Italian and Korean ancestry meeting in a face that looked carved from granite. Dark hair, perfectly positioned, silvered at the temples. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye to his cheekbone, thin and precise like someone had traced it there with intention. His watch caught the yellow security light as he moved. Gold, expensive, worth more than Mia's car and the apartment she was about to lose combined. Nicholas Calabrese was a man accustomed to moving through the world and having the world arrange itself around him. He froze mid-step when he saw her. The woman on her knees in the garbage. The woman eating spoiled chicken. The woman with defiant eyes and defeated hands and a dignity that should have been destroyed by now but somehow was not. His Lieutenant Carlo approached from the passenger side, hand moving toward the inside of his jacket where his weapon lived. Carlo was thick-necked and scarred, the kind of man who had forgotten what his face looked like without anger painting it. "Sir, we need to move." "The warehouse." Nicholas raised one hand. Just one hand. It was enough to stop Carlo's words mid-sentence, enough to stop his movement, enough to make 3 other men in suits immediately still their bodies and lower their eyes. Nicholas did not look away from Mia. She did not look away from him. The rain fell harder, a downpour now, and neither of them moved. His expensive coat began to darken with water. Her uniform clung tighter. Between them was something wordless passing through the cold air, like electricity, like recognition, like the moment before a blade cuts through silk. "Sir," Carlo said again, urgency creeping into his voice. "We have exactly 9 minutes before the police change shifts." "The warehouse." "What is your name?" Nicholas asked the woman. His voice. It was deep and solid like an oath, the kind of voice that had given orders that resulted in men disappearing from the earth. The kind of voice that should have terrified her. It did terrify her. But something else moved through her chest too, something like the memory of being seen. Really seen. Not as a maid, not as a problem, not as a woman who could be used and discarded, but as a person. "Mia," she said. Her voice trembled like a candle in the wind, barely a whisper. "Mia Reynolds." Franco, another lieutenant, exchanged a look with Carlo. In 20 years of working for Nicholas Calabrese, neither of them had ever heard him ask a stranger's name. They had never heard him stop for anyone. His code was simple and unforgiving: take what you need, protect what is yours, eliminate what threatens you. Sentiment was a weakness that could get you killed. Sentiment was for people who did not run empires built on fear and absolute control. "Mia Reynolds," Nicholas repeated. The way he said her name made it sound like something precious. Like he was testing the syllables on his tongue, deciding if they tasted like truth. "We need to go," Carlo said, his voice harder now. The 9 minutes were becoming 8, and this kind of delay could mean federal agents instead of local police, and federal agents could mean complications that would cost them weeks of careful reconstruction. Nicholas reached into his coat. Mia's breath caught. She had seen enough movies, heard enough stories, lived enough days in proximity to violence to know what came next. Men in suits. Guns. Dead bodies in garbage bags matching the trash that had just been her dinner. She thought of Emma asleep at home, thought of her daughter's asthma, thought of $5 in her pocket that would not get anywhere near a pharmacy with the medication Emma needed to breathe. Nicholas pulled out a card. It was white, expensive, embossed in gold lettering. He knelt down in front of her, his 6'3" frame folding itself to match her height, his expensive suit pressing into rain and dirt and garbage with absolute indifference to the cost. "If you need help," he said, "you call this number. You ask for Franco. You tell him that Nicholas sent you. You tell him your name again. And he will help you." Mia stared at the card. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely take it. "Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it. "Why would you help me? I am nobody." Something moved across his face. Something ancient and wounded. Something that suggested he understood that word, nobody, in a way that went deeper than poverty, deeper than one night eating garbage behind a hotel, deeper than a foreclosure notice and $5 and a daughter who needed medicine. "Because the people who did this believed you were nobody," he said quietly. "And that belief needs to be corrected." He stood. The moment broke like a snapped thread. Carlo was suddenly pulling at his elbow, and Franco was checking his watch, and the rain was becoming heavier, and the night was closing in around them with that particular urgency that only men in his position understood. The 3 black SUVs were moving before Nicholas had fully settled into the back seat. Their engines growled. Their headlights swept across the alley one final time, illuminating Mia sitting in the trash, clutching a white card with gold lettering, a half-eaten chicken breast still in her other hand, tears mixing with rain on her face. Within seconds, they were gone. The alley returned to silence. Just the sound of rain on concrete, on dumpsters, on the torn fabric of Mia's uniform. The yellow security light continued its sickly flicker. The garbage remained garbage. The cold remained cold. But what changed in that moment was something neither of them could have predicted, something that would unwind across months like a curse breaking open, like ice cracking under spring sun, like 2 lives suddenly discovering they had been traveling toward each other all along. Mia looked down at the card in her shaking hand. The gold lettering caught the security light. Franco. Nicholas Calabrese. A phone number that looked like it could summon angels or demons depending on what side of the law you were standing on. She thought of Emma asleep on their apartment mattress, the one they would lose in 3 days. She thought of the foreclosure notice in her coat pocket. She thought of Douglas Hale's hands and Sophie Langford's indifference and $5 that could buy approximately nothing. And she thought of a man's voice saying, because the people who did this believed you were nobody. She put the white card carefully in her coat pocket, next to the foreclosure notice. Then she finished the half-eaten chicken breast, because hunger did not wait for miracles. Hunger was immediate. Hunger was now. Mia Reynolds stood on shaking legs and walked back into the Crescent Hotel kitchen through the loading dock door. The industrial fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like insects trapped in plastic. The massive refrigerators hummed with the sound of preserved food worth thousands of dollars, food that would be thrown away if not sold by morning, food that would return to garbage if Mia did not stock it properly on the shelves. She had for more hours before her shift ended. For more hours before she could go home to Emma. For more hours before the sun rose and the world demanded something new from her. But now she carried something in her pocket besides a foreclosure notice and $5. Now she carried the phone number of a man whose voice sounded like thunder, and she had absolutely no idea that calling it would be the moment everything changed. 6 weeks earlier, at 4:47 in the morning, Mia Reynolds stood at the kitchen counter of her 4th-floor walk-up in the Tenderloin, counting coins under a single bare bulb that cast everything in sickly yellow light. Quarters and dimes spread across the chipped formica like the last pieces of a puzzle that no longer fit together. $5. That was all. $5 in a city where a cup of coffee cost 3 times that, where rent was due in 9 days, where Emma's asthma inhaler prescription sat in a pharmacy bag downstairs, $340 that might as well have been $3 million. The radiator behind her clanked and wheezed but produced no heat. November rain hammered against the window she had covered with cardboard and duct tape 3 months ago when the glass cracked. Behind that barrier of refuse and desperation, San Francisco glittered in the pre-dawn darkness. A city of light. A city where she remained invisible, moving through it like a ghost, leaving no trace except the streaks on mirrors and the toilet bowls she scrubbed clean with her own hands. Emma slept on the mattress they shared in the next room, her small body curled under a blanket Mia had found at a Salvation Army bin. The nebulizer hummed on the nightstand, a rhythmic mechanical sound like a creature breathing beside them. Emma's asthma had worsened this year. Worsened. What an inadequate word for the terror that seized Mia every time her daughter's breathing turned shallow and labored, every time she heard the whistle and wheeze that meant Emma was drowning in her own body. Mia poured water into a pot and set it on the stove. Oatmeal again. They would have oatmeal again, made with water because the milk had run out on Tuesday and she could not afford to replace it until Thursday when she received her paycheck, minus the hours Douglas Hale had arbitrarily cut, minus the tips she suspected he had stolen. 20 minutes later, Emma emerged from the bedroom rubbing her eyes, still half asleep, her small body moving through the cold apartment like she belonged in this particular version of poverty. She wore the same dress she had worn yesterday, a cheap polyester thing from a discount store, long enough to last through this year and into next if they were careful. Emma was always careful. 6 years old and already she understood the mathematics of scarcity. They sat at the folding table Mia had found on the street. Emma moved her spoon through the grey oatmeal, pulling it up and letting it drop, a motion that seemed to drain everything from her. "Mama, why do we eat oatmeal every day?" Emma's voice was small, tired, older than it should be. Mia reached across the table and kissed her forehead. The skin was warm. "Because it makes you strong, baby. Strong like a lion." Emma looked at the oatmeal and then at her mother. She did not believe this. At 6 years old, she already understood that lies existed, especially the ones told with love. The walk to the Crescent Hotel took 43 minutes in the rain. Mia's shoes had holes in both soles. By the time she arrived at the loading dock at 5:52 a.m., water had soaked through to her socks. Her uniform hung in her employee locker downstairs, grey dress, white apron, black shoes that split at the seams. She changed in the bathroom with the door locked, her thin body shaking from cold or fear or the particular exhaustion that comes from living without any margin for error. The Crescent Hotel occupied 3 city blocks of prime real estate in the financial district. The lobby glowed with marble and brass and recessed lighting that cost more per month than Mia's annual rent. Guests arrived in black cars and walked across the polished floor with the confidence of people who had never counted coins on a kitchen counter. Tech executives in hoodies worth $300. European tourists in designer luggage. A Saudi diplomat and his entourage who left a $200 cash tip on Wednesday that Mia had not seen a single cent of. Her job was to clean. Room after room after room, her hands moving with the methodical precision of someone who had done this thousands of times. 23 rooms before noon. Toilets and sinks and mirrors. Changing sheets while the smell of other people's bodies lingered in the fabric. Vacuuming. Scrubbing. Always moving, always behind schedule, because Douglas Hale had cut her hours from 40 to 32 per week, a reduction he never explained, a reduction that translated directly into $128 less per month. It was during her break on the second Tuesday that Douglas Hale blocked the supply closet door. He was late 40s, slicked back hair the color of motor oil, a gold watch that caught the fluorescent light. The watch probably cost $8,000. Mia knew this because she had looked it up once on her phone at the library, wondering what that kind of money felt like on a wrist. Mia. He said her name like it belonged to him. I noticed you took an extra 15 minutes on your break yesterday. I was in the bathroom, Mr. Hale. I have a medical condition. I don't pay you to have conditions. He stepped closer. His breath smelled like scotch. It was 10 in the morning. I pay you to work. And about those tips from the penthouse suite last week? Those go into the management pool. Hotel policy. Mia knew this was a lie. She had watched him pocket the cash from the Saudi diplomat while the other maids stared at their shoes. Mr. Hale, I need those tips. My daughter, she has. Your daughter isn't my problem. His hand grazed her hip. She stepped backward into the shelving and metal bottles of bleach rattled against plastic shelves. And if you complain to anyone at all, I'll make a call to immigration. Doesn't matter that you're legal. I know people. The investigation alone will cost you this job. And then what? Who's going to hire you after that? Who's going to care about your daughter? He left before she could answer. The supply closet smelled like ammonia and his cologne, and Mia stood very still, her hands shaking, understanding the precise dimensions of her powerlessness. The evening came. Picking Emma up from Mrs. Chen, the neighbor who watched her for $10 a day that Mia could not actually afford but could not refuse because there was no other option. Walking 16 blocks in the rain because the bus cost $2.50 and that was money for something else, always money for something else. The discount grocery store where everything was marked down because it was damaged or approaching its expiration date. $18 for eggs and rice and beans and vegetables that were soft in places they should have been firm. The pharmacy filled the prescription anyway, and Mia picked it up even though she could not pay for it. She told them she would come back next week. She had no intention of coming back next week. She had no intention of paying. The nebulizer at home would have to be enough. Emma's breathing would have to stabilize on its own. The human body was resilient. Children were resilient. That was what Mia told herself when she could not sleep. At 11 o'clock that night, sitting at the kitchen table with Emma asleep in the next room, Mia opened the envelope that had arrived on Monday. The foreclosure notice. The words were careful and legal and absolute. $125,000. Due in 3 days. This was the emergency room visit last year, transformed into numbers, multiplied by interest, compounded by late fees and penalties and the particular mathematics of predatory lending. She did the calculation on the back of the envelope, her hand shaking. Even working 24 hours a day, even if she never slept again, even if she cut every other expense and walked everywhere and ate nothing but oatmeal, the number did not move. It was immovable. It was written in stone. The radiator clanked behind her. The rain continued against the cardboard window. And somewhere above her, in the upper floors of the city, people slept in beds that cost more than everything she owned. They dreamed in comfort while she sat in the dark calculating the exact moment her daughter would lose her home. But what she did not know was that Sophie Langford, the owner of the Crescent Hotel, had been watching her for weeks. Watching her scrub. Watching her move through the hotel like she was trying to disappear. Watching her from behind the glass of her corner office on the 20th floor, where the view stretched to the bay and beyond it, the entire world seemed small enough to fit in a single hand. The radiator clanked behind her. The rain continued against the cardboard window. And somewhere above her, in the upper floors of the city, people slept in beds that cost more than everything she owned. They dreamed in comfort while she sat in the dark calculating the exact moment her daughter would lose her home. But Sophie Langford was not asleep. Sophie stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office on the 20th floor of the Crescent Hotel, watching the city lights blur through rain that fell like a curse. She was 52 years old, blonde highlights perfectly maintained by a stylist who came to her office every 6 weeks, Chanel suit that cost more than Reynolds earned in 2 months. Her fingers held a glass of champagne that she did not drink. Her eyes held something colder than the November night. She had been watching Mia for weeks. Watching her scrub the lobby floor on bleeding knees at 6 in the morning while guests stepped over her without seeing. Watching her collapse against the service elevator wall during her 17-minute break, head in her hands, shoulders shaking like the building itself was coming apart. Watching her work a double shift, a triple shift, moving through the hotel like she was trying to become invisible. Sophie's assistant Kevin had asked once, "Should we check on her? She looks sick." Sophie had closed her laptop without answering. "She's getting paid, isn't she?" That was the philosophy that built empires. That separated the people who had from the people who did not. Sentiment was a luxury. Compassion was inefficiency. But today, something had changed. Sophie had received a phone call during her lunch meeting. Her friend Claudia, gossiping over mimosas at a Nob Hill restaurant, breathing the kind of news that could reshape a life. "Your little cleaning girl was seen getting into Nicholas Calabrese's car at the Crescent Hotel yesterday afternoon. My husband's firm handles his legitimate holdings. Apparently, she and her daughter spent the night at his mountain compound." Sophie's fork had paused midair. Nicholas Calabrese. The name alone carried weight in this city. Violence and money compressed into a single identity. A man who could acquire companies like other people acquired shoes. A man who did not show mercy because mercy required acknowledgement of humanity, and Nicholas Calabrese had learned long ago that humanity was a weakness that got people killed. Sophie had excused herself from brunch early. She had gone back to her office. She had pulled up the security footage from yesterday afternoon, the moment Mia had walked out to the circular driveway where 3 black SUVs waited, their windows tinted dark as secrets. Sophie had watched Mia approach the lead vehicle with her daughter in her arms, watched her hesitate, watched her make the calculation between the unknown and the certain death of refusing. Then the rear door had opened and a man had stepped out into the afternoon light. Even from the grainy security camera angle, even with the resolution degraded to the point of abstraction, Sophie had recognized the way he moved. The way power announced itself in every gesture, every placement of weight, every angle of a shoulder. She had watched him speak to Mia. Watched Mia's resistance visibly crumble. Watched them disappear into the vehicle together. And in that moment, Sophie understood something that had taken her 30 years of climbing to learn: leverage. A woman with a child, suddenly protected by the most dangerous man in the Pacific Northwest. A woman who had nothing, suddenly connected to someone who had everything. A woman who could be used, manipulated, threatened, broken, because threatening her would threaten him, and threatening him would be the most powerful move Sophie Langford had ever made. She began to smile. It was not a smile that reached her eyes. Meanwhile, on Highway 101, the blizzard was reaching its crescendo. Mia sat in the back seat of the black SUV, Emma wrapped in a cashmere blanket that Franco had placed over her, the child's breathing finally slowing from the panicked gasps of the highway to something almost normal. The heater roared. The windshield wipers moved in perfect rhythm. Outside, the storm had become almost alive, throwing snow at the vehicle like something with intention and malice. In the front seat, Carlo was driving with the kind of precision that came from years of moving through dangerous territory. Franco held a tablet, checking messages with his free hand. Neither man spoke. The radio played low jazz, something that seemed incongruous in a vehicle full of men who had killed people, but Nicholas insisted on it. The world was violent enough without surrounding yourself with violent sound. Nicholas sat beside Mia, not touching her, but positioned in a way that made his presence impossible to ignore. His white shirt was stained with blood that was not his own. His knuckles were split and swollen. He had the appearance of someone who had just stepped out of a place where rules did not exist and civility had been abandoned like a coat in an emergency. "How far?" Nicholas asked Carlo. 20 minutes if this road stays clear. Otherwise 30. Nicholas nodded. He turned slightly to look at Mia, who was watching him with the kind of wariness that trauma teaches. "You're wondering who I am. Who we are. What you've gotten yourself into." "I'm wondering if I made a terrible mistake," Mia said quietly. Emma was asleep against her shoulder now, the warmth and the motion having finally exhausted the child's nervous system. "I'm wondering if my daughter and I are about to disappear into a story that people read online and forget about in a week." Franco made a sound that might have been a laugh, but he did not turn around. "Fair question," Nicholas said. "My name is Nicholas Calabrese. The men you see here, Carlo has been with me for 12 years. Franco for 14. We work in enterprise. Different kinds of enterprise. We are not good men, Mia Reynolds. We have done things that would keep you awake at night. But I give you my word that your daughter will not be harmed. That you will not be harmed. That we will shelter you until that storm passes and you can make your own decision about what happens next." "Why?" Mia asked. "Why would you do this?" Nicholas was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the snow seemed to pause, as if listening. "Because I was 7 years old once," he said finally. "And my mother was carrying me through a winter just like this. And a man could have stopped and helped us. No one did." The rest of the journey happened in silence except for the sound of the engine, the whisper of tires on snow, and Emma's soft, even breathing. The compound appeared like something that did not belong in the world, a massive timber lodge surrounded by nothing but pine trees and darkness, every window blazing with light, smoke rising from chimneys like prayers being sent upward. 2 men in black tactical gear stood at the gate. They recognized the SUVs and waved them through without question. The lodge itself seemed to exhale warmth the moment Mia stepped through the front door. Hardwood floors that had been polished to the point of reflection. Leather furniture arranged around a fireplace the size of a car, flames roaring inside it with the kind of intensity that suggested unlimited fuel and unlimited expense. Floor-to-ceiling windows showing nothing but white darkness beyond the perimeter of light. This was a place built to disappear. A place built to exist outside the rules of the city below. "Guest room on the 2nd floor," Nicholas said, gesturing toward the staircase. "Bathroom attached. Clothes in the closet. Food in the kitchen whenever you need it. The doors don't lock from the outside. You are not a prisoner." Mia carried Emma up the stairs on numb legs, her wet clothes dripping on the hardwood, leaving a trail of water and snow that seemed shameful against such careful beauty. The guest room was larger than the apartment she shared with Emma. The bed had white linens that probably cost more than her monthly salary. The windows overlooked the compound, the darkness, the sense of absolute isolation. She laid Emma on the bed without undressing her. She sat on the edge of the mattress and tried to understand what had just happened. How she had gone from walking into a blizzard with $5 in her pocket to sitting in a warm room in a compound owned by a man whose name apparently meant something in this city. How she had made the calculation in 30 seconds that this stranger was safer than the storm. The radiator beneath the window hissed and clanked. Outside, the wind howled like something wounded. Sometime after midnight, when Emma was in a sleep deep enough that nothing would wake her, Mia found herself walking down the stairs toward the sound of the fireplace. The great room was empty except for one figure standing at the window, glass of amber liquid in hand, staring at the storm like it owed him something. "I need to call my work," Mia said. Her voice sounded small in the space. "If I miss tomorrow, they'll fire me. I can't afford." "The Crescent Hotel," Nicholas said without turning around. "You work for Sophie Langford. Making $9 an hour. Missing work to accommodate life-threatening emergency. Yes, she'll fire you immediately." Mia stopped. "How did you know that?" "I pay attention to people who matter to me." Nicholas finally turned. Even in casual clothes, black sweater, dark jeans, he radiated the kind of controlled violence that does not announce itself loudly because it does not need to. "How much do you owe on the foreclosure?" $125,000. Due in 3 days. Nicholas pulled out his phone. He made a call. The conversation was brief. "It's done. Buy out Apex Financial. Cancel the Reynolds account. Today." He hung up. "Your debt is handled." "What?" Mia felt the room tilt slightly. "You can't just, that's not how anything works. You can't just." "I can." "And I did." He returned to staring at the fire. "The foreclosure is cancelled. Your daughter won't lose her home. You don't have to work 17-hour shifts anymore. You have options now that you did not have this morning." Mia sat down on the leather sofa because standing felt suddenly impossible. She tried to process what it meant when the thing you had been carrying, the weight of it, the absolute immovable certainty of it, simply vanished because someone with enough resources decided it should. "Why?" she whispered. "You don't know me. I'm nobody." Nicholas turned to face her fully. In the firelight, the scar that ran from his left eye to his cheekbone seemed to deepen, seemed to tell its own story of violence and survival. "You're not nobody to your daughter," he said. "And you remind me of someone who deserved better than what she got." The fire crackled. The storm raged outside. And neither of them knew that back at the Crescent Hotel, Douglas Hale was already making phone calls to ensure that Mia Reynolds would never work in this city again. That Sophie Langford was already constructing a plan, a lever, a weapon forged from Mia's own salvation. That the next 4 days would change everything. 5 months later, and Mia Reynolds still woke at 4 a.m. out of habit, her body trained by years of pre-dawn shifts to treat sleep like a luxury she could not afford. But now, when her eyes opened in the darkness of the apartment Nicholas had placed her in, though he insisted it came from a women's assistance program, and she had learned not to argue, she felt something different. The weight was gone. Not the memory of it, but the crushing, suffocating present tense of it. Emma slept in the room down the hall, safe in a school with teachers who knew her name, in a building where the landlord did not enter without permission, where the heat worked all winter and the water ran hot. Mia rose anyway, muscle memory stronger than gratitude, and moved to the kitchen. Coffee. She made coffee now because she could afford it, and the small act of pouring hot water into a filter still felt like theft. At the non-profit where she worked, data entry, filing, administrative support, they had recognized something in her. After 3 months, they promoted her to coordinator. The salary was not large, but it was stable. It was honest. It was hers. She had opened a savings account. Inside it sat $2,847. $2,847 that belonged to her alone, that she had earned with her own hands, that no one could take. Nicholas had appeared sporadically throughout these 5 months. Never announced. Always when she needed him most, though she had not called. An envelope of cash inside her coat pocket with no note attached. $5,000. Then, 3 weeks later, another envelope. $10,000 this time. She had confronted him about it, and he had simply said, "I move money around. Invest it places. Sometimes investments pay dividends. You happen to be an investment that is returning well." She did not believe him. But she also did not refuse the money, because that would have been a refusal of Emma's better life, and Mia had never been noble enough to do that. The last time she saw him was 2 weeks ago. He had appeared at her apartment at midnight with groceries, real groceries, not the discount bin scraps, and they had cooked together in the small kitchen. Emma had gone to bed. Nicholas had made pasta from scratch, his hands moving with surprising gentleness as he kneaded the dough, and Mia had stood close enough to smell him, that expensive cologne mixed with rain and something darker underneath, something that smelled like power. They had not touched. Not once in 5 months had he crossed that line. He had kept her at arm's length as carefully as she had kept him. As if they were both waiting for permission that neither could grant. That was before Douglas Hale appeared. It was a Tuesday evening in November when the pounding started. Sharp, aggressive, the sound of a man's fist against her apartment door at 8:17 p.m. Mia knew the time because she had been looking at her phone, scrolling through a job training program she was considering, and the moment the sound came, every cell in her body went still. She did not move. Sometimes the pounding stopped if you did not answer. But this time it did not stop. "Mia! I know you're in there. Open this goddamn door." Douglas Hale. His voice was slurred, twisted with the kind of rage that alcohol gave to men who already believed themselves entitled to rage. She had not seen him since the day she disappeared from the Crescent Hotel, the morning after Nicholas had paid her debt, and she had simply walked out of that job and never returned, leaving no forwarding address, no explanation, nothing but her maid's uniform folded on the shelf in the employee break room. Mia approached the door, kept the chain locked. She opened it just enough to see him through the crack. Douglas stood in the hallway in a wrinkled sport coat, his tie loosened, his hair falling across his forehead. His eyes were red-rimmed and burning. "Mr. Hale. What are you doing here? What am I doing here?" He laughed, a sound like gravel. "What am I doing here? You disappeared, Mia. You made me look bad. You made me look like I couldn't keep control of my own staff, and then I find out you've been—" He leaned closer to the crack. "I know what you've been doing. Sleeping with Nicholas Calabrese. That's what I heard. You're a whore, Mia. A cheap whore who got lucky. Go home, Mr. Hale. You think you're better than me now? You think you can just—" Behind her, a small voice, "Mama." Emma appeared in the hallway in her pajamas, her hair disheveled from sleep, one hand clutching the stuffed rabbit that Nicholas had given her weeks ago. She was 6 years old and still believed the world was fundamentally kind. Douglas saw her through the crack in the door, and something vicious spread across his face. "And you're raising your daughter to follow in your footsteps. Like mother, like—" Mia slammed the door. The chain rattled. Her hand shook as she locked the deadbolt, the secondary lock, then moved to the window and locked that too, though they were on the 5th floor and the building was secure and nothing could touch her here. Nothing could touch Emma. She scooped her daughter into her arms and carried her to the bedroom, held her until her breathing steadied, whispered promises that she did not know how to keep. When Emma finally slept, Mia went to the bathroom and locked the door and called Nicholas. He answered on the first ring, as if he had been waiting. "What's wrong?" "It's nothing. I shouldn't have." "Mia." "What happened?" She told him everything. The words came out fractured, scattered, but she told him. When she finished, the silence on the other end of the line was colder than the blizzard that had brought them together. A silence that contained decisions being made, consequences being calculated, machinery being set in motion. "Lock your door. I'm coming." He hung up. She heard the rain against the windows, heard it harder now, like it was trying to get in. Like everything dangerous was trying to get in, and only this locked door, only her presence in the darkness with her sleeping child, stood between them and the world. The next day was worse. The next day was Sophie Langford. The school fundraiser was supposed to be safe. Emma's class had organized a bake sale and silent auction. Mia had helped bake cookies 2 nights before, had sat with her daughter at the kitchen table while Emma decorated them with frosting, had felt something like normal happiness settle into her chest. She arrived at the school gymnasium at 2 p.m. on Wednesday, Emma's hand in hers, ready to support her daughter's first real school event. Sophie Langford was standing near the entrance, dressed in a cream-colored dress that cost more than Mia's monthly rent, her hair arranged in the kind of style that required professional maintenance, her smile sharp as a blade wrapped in ice. She had been on the hotel planning committee. Of course she had. Women like Sophie Langford inserted themselves into every space that mattered, made themselves indispensable through cruelty and connections. Mia Reynolds, Sophie said, her voice loud enough to carry across the gymnasium. I'm surprised to see you here. I thought women in your situation preferred to keep a lower profile. 20 parents turned to look. Mia's body went rigid. Excuse me. Well, you disappeared from your job at the Crescent without notice, owing the hotel $3,000 in uniform and equipment fees, and now you're living in an apartment you couldn't possibly afford on legitimate income. Sophie tilted her head, the gesture almost sympathetic. Makes one wonder what services you're providing to afford such luxuries. The gymnasium was very quiet now. One woman pulled her daughter away from Emma, taking several deliberate steps toward the other side of the room. I don't know what you're implying, Ms. Langford, but… I'm not implying anything, dear. I'm stating facts. You're a gold digger who seduced a dangerous man, and now you're putting everyone's children at risk by bringing his world into this school. Sophie turned to address the other parents directly. I'm sure you all understand. When someone of that caliber enters a community like this, it does tend to attract unwanted attention. Isn't that right, everyone? Nobody contradicted her. Nobody defended Mia. Emma's small hand gripped Mia's fingers tightly, and she could feel her daughter's eyes searching her face, looking for an explanation that would make this make sense, looking for reassurance that could not be given because the world had just proven itself to be exactly as cruel as Mia had always feared. She walked out with her head high and her daughter's hand in hers, but tears streamed down her face the moment they reached the parking lot. At 2 a.m. that night, Mia sat alone on her apartment balcony in the freezing rain, her fingers wrapped around her phone, scrolling to Nicholas's number but not calling. She could not be the reason his world collided with hers any further. She could not be the woman who dragged a man like that into school fundraisers and parent-teacher conferences and the ordinary machinery of a child's life. Her hands trembled against the railing, knuckles white. The old thoughts creeping back in like fog, like a sickness she had never quite healed from. You don't deserve this. You're poison. Everyone you touch gets hurt. Maybe Emma would be better off without you dragging her down. Maybe she would be safer if you just… Her phone buzzed. A text from Nicholas. I know you're awake. I know you're spiraling. Don't. You are not what they say you are. You are what Emma sees when she looks at you. You are what I see. Stay. Mia read it 3 times. Something in her chest unlocked, a door she had not known was closed swinging open. She typed back, okay. Help me. The next morning at 6 a.m., Douglas Hale was leaving his condominium in Pacific Heights when 12 men in black suits emerged from 3 vehicles as if they had materialized from the concrete itself. Carlo and Franco flanked the entrance. Nicholas stepped out of the center car pristine in a charcoal suit, his face expressionless, the scar that ran from his left eye to his cheekbone seeming to deepen in the early light. Douglas recognized him and went white. His entire body seemed to collapse inward as if his skeleton had become liquid. Mr. Calabrese. I can explain. Explain what? Nicholas's voice was quiet, which made it worse. How you stole from a single mother. How you threatened to destroy her immigration status despite her being a citizen. How you showed up drunk at her home and called her a whore in front of her child. Douglas backed against the building's entrance, trembling like a cornered animal, his breath coming in shallow gasps. I didn't, she's lying. Nicholas stepped close enough that Douglas could smell his cologne, close enough that Douglas could see every scar, every story written in Nicholas's face. You put your hands on her. Multiple times. You stole $4,700 from her over 18 months. You threatened her daughter's safety. Please. I'll do anything. I have money. I don't want your money. Nicholas nodded to Franco. I want you gone. Two men grabbed Douglas by the arms. He screamed, struggled, his feet scraping against the pavement. Where are you taking me? You can't do this. I'll call the police. Carlo leaned in, his voice casual as weather. The Volkov family sends their regards. They've been looking for someone to fill a very specific role in their Portland operation. Congratulations on your new career. They dragged him into the black SUV. His screams echoed off the buildings as the vehicles pulled away into morning traffic, and nobody on the street moved to help him. Nobody ever did when men like that disappeared. Sophie Langford's destruction came on the same morning, methodical and absolute. The FBI raid occurred at 10 a.m., 20 agents in tactical gear moving through the Crescent Hotel with search warrants and forensic accountants, with paperwork that had taken weeks to prepare, evidence that had been carefully gathered. The lead agent found Sophie in her office, coffee still steaming on her mahogany desk. Sophie Langford, you are under investigation for tax fraud, embezzlement of employee wages, and racketeering. We have evidence of a systematic scheme to steal tips and overtime pay from hotel workers over the past 7 years, totaling $890,000. Sophie's face drained of color. This is absurd. I want my lawyer. Your lawyer is being questioned separately. We have testimony from 47 employees. We have your financial records. This isn't going away. By noon, it was on the local news. By 5 p.m., Sophie's society friends had stopped answering her calls. By midnight, her husband had filed for divorce. The justice was not death, too quick, too easy, too merciful. It was systematic destruction, federal charges, her mugshot in every newspaper, her assets frozen, her reputation disintegrated like ash. 40 years in federal prison, and every single day she would remember the woman she had called a gold digger in front of those parents, would understand exactly what her words had cost. 3 days later, Nicholas appeared at Mia's apartment at sunset. She opened the door, and she already knew. You did something. I solved a problem. Douglas is gone. Sophie was arrested. That was you. They deserved worse. He stepped inside, and she closed the door behind him. Emma was at a friend's house. They were alone for the first time in months. Why do you care what happens to me? Mia asked. Why risk everything for someone like me? Nicholas turned to face her fully, and in the fading light his eyes were exactly the color of storm clouds. Because when I saw you eating from that trash bin, I saw myself at 7 years old, stealing food from dumpsters while my father drank away our rent money. Because when you stood in that alley in the rain and told me to stay away, I saw my mother's courage in the face of impossible odds. Because you are the first person in 20 years who makes me believe that some people deserve to be protected instead of feared. Mia crossed the space between them, cups his face in her hands. I love you. I've loved you since you gave Emma those pancakes and pretended you didn't know how to make them just so Carlo would have to do it. I love you, and it terrifies me. Nicholas kisses her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. Then be terrified with me. Build something with me. Stand beside me as my equal, not as someone I saved. Is that what I am? You're equal. Mia, you're the only person who has ever made me want to be better than what I am. If that's not equal, I don't know what is. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was clearing toward evening, toward whatever came next. 6 months had passed since the night the rain stopped and the sky cleared toward whatever came next. 6 months of mornings that no longer began with counting pennies, of afternoons that held something resembling hope, of evenings when Emma asked what was for dinner without fear in her small voice. Mia adjusted the midnight blue gown one final time. The silk caught the light like water, and she still could not believe it was hers to wear. Nicholas had bought it 3 weeks ago, draping it across their bed without ceremony, and when she had protested, "This costs more than I made in a year, we cannot," he had simply closed the bedroom door and left her alone with the impossible fabric. The San Francisco Children's Hospital gala sprawled across the rooftop of the Fairmont, city lights bleeding into the darkness below like 1,000 fallen stars. Mia stood beside Nicholas in a way she still was learning to do, not hiding behind him, not standing behind him, but beside him, their hands barely touching at their sides. Carlo and Franco maintained position 30 feet distant, their dark suits blending into the catering staff's uniforms, security without suffocation. A woman in a silver dress approached with a microphone and the particular smile that meant business. "Mr. Calabrese, is it true you've made a substantial donation to the Single Mothers Housing Initiative?" Nicholas turned to Mia. "Not slightly. Completely." His body angled toward her as though she were the only person on this rooftop, the only person in the city, the only person who mattered. "My partner Mia Reynolds spearheaded that initiative." "Direct your questions to her." The reporter's expression flickered, surprise, recalibration, then genuine interest as she redirected her attention. Mia heard the silence first. The moment of held breath where she could have deferred, smiled, passed the microphone back. Instead, she stepped forward. Her voice emerged steady, edged with the authority of someone who had lived the problem, not theorized it. "The initiative addresses what most housing programs ignore, that single mothers don't need charity. They need access. Access to fair wages, to childcare support, to credit without predatory interest rates. I know because I lived in a car once. I counted the change in my wallet and decided between my daughter's asthma medication and groceries." She paused, and the reporter was writing now, actually listening. "Every mother deserves the dignity of building her own life, not the indignity of being grateful for someone else's handout. That's what this program does. It builds. It doesn't rescue. It doesn't save. It simply removes the obstacles that should never have existed." When the interview ended, when the reporter had thanked her and moved on to collect quotes from the hospital's director, Nicholas took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused at the base of his fingers from years of violence that he was trying to bury in legitimate business holdings and charity foundations bearing names that sounded like redemption. "You didn't have to do that," Mia said as they walked toward the balcony overlooking the bay. "Deflect credit to me." "I didn't deflect anything. You did the work. I just signed the checks." His fingers interlaced with hers. "The money is nothing, Mia. Thousands of men have money. You have something much rarer, the lived experience to make others understand why it matters." The city stretched below them, all those lives contained in buildings and streets, people counting their change just as she once had, people deciding between medications and food, between rent and their children's futures. She thought of Sophie Langford, now serving a federal sentence for embezzlement and wage theft, her country club revoked, her daughter refusing her calls. She thought of Douglas Hale, currently at San Quentin, where his hands that once moved faster than his apologies now move for nothing at all, in a cell where there was nobody to intimidate. Justice had not looked like mercy. Justice had looked like evidence collected in the dead of night, like federal investigators arriving at Sophie's penthouse at dawn, like Douglas being led from the Crescent Hotel in handcuffs while its new management watched with quiet satisfaction. But vengeance and justice, Mia had learned, were not the same thing. Nicholas reached into his jacket. The movement was casual, but she felt her heart accelerate anyway. He was always carrying the weight of what he was, a man whose first instinct remained violence, whose mind still calculated threat assessments, whose people still checked the rooftop for snipers before he appeared anywhere. The box was small. Leather. It was also the color of old money, the color of things that cost more than the apartment she used to live in. "I'm not asking you to marry me tonight," he said. His voice had dropped to the register that made her think of standing rooms and men in black suits exchanging meaningful glances. "I'm asking you to know that when you're ready, I'm here. I will always be here." Mia took the box with hands that trembled like a candle in wind. She opened it. Inside, a diamond caught the city lights, simple, elegant, the kind of stone that whispered rather than screamed its value. She closed the box and handed it back to him. "Ask me in a year," she said. "After Emma has had time to adjust to all of this. After we're sure this isn't just trauma bonding or gratitude masquerading as love." Nicholas took the box without argument. He had learned patience from her, learned that the most powerful men are the ones who can wait for what they want instead of taking it. He slipped the box back into his jacket. His hand found hers again, and they stood there on the edge of the city, watching the lights multiply in the darkness like hope being born. "And Nicholas?" Mia said quietly. "When you do ask, the answer will be yes." He kissed her forehead, her temple, then her mouth, slow and deliberate, like a prayer she was finally learning to answer. 1 year later, the mountain lodge waited where it had always waited, perched above the pine forests where the snow fell differently depending on your elevation and your luck. The blizzard that had brought them together had been violent and absolute. This snow came gentle, quiet, like a second chance being offered in the form of fresh powder on the roof tiles. Emma was asleep upstairs in the room with the yellow walls and the bookshelf that now held both children's picture books and the chess strategy guides Nicholas had started buying her. She beat him regularly now. He pretended to be bothered by this. She pretended to believe him. Nicholas and Mia sat by the fireplace where they had first talked, where he had watched her drink coffee as though it were a miracle in a ceramic cup. The fire was lower now, burning toward embers, casting light and shadow across his face in equal measure. "Do you remember what you asked me that night?" he said. "I asked who you really were. And do you know now?" Mia took his hand. She intertwined their fingers, feeling the cold of the gold ring he wore, the warmth of the man beneath. "I know you're the man who stopped in a storm when everyone else would have driven past. I know you're the man who learned to make pancakes because my daughter likes them, even though you learned it from Carlo and pretended it was a mystery. I know you're the man who destroyed 2 people not for yourself but for us. And I know you're the man I choose, every day, for the rest of my life." He pulled the box from his pocket. Same leather, same color. But his hands were steady now as he opened it. The diamond caught the firelight and threw it back at her, scattered and multiplied. He did not go down on one knee. He simply held the box steady and waited for her answer, which he already knew, which she had promised under a balcony overlooking a city that contained all their broken beginnings and healed middles and unknown endings. "Yes," she said. "Yes, yes, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and when he kissed her, the fire crackled louder, as though the lodge itself was celebrating, as though the walls remembered the storm that had brought them and understood the significance of the calm that followed. The camera would pull back later, showing them silhouetted against the firelight, the snow falling outside in its gentle indifference, the world quiet and safe and entirely theirs. But in that moment, in that real moment before any moment could be frozen or preserved or turned into memory, they were simply 2 people who had found each other in the rubble of what they had been and were building something new. The morning light came differently to the foreclosure house on Valencia Street. The house that had demanded $125,000 in 72 hours, the house that had represented the end of everything Mia could imagine. Nicholas had bought it back quietly, through a shell corporation, then he had told her, and she had cried for the first time in years, not from fear but from the understanding that some men actually kept their promises. The renovation had taken 5 months. The grand opening took 1 afternoon. Mia cut the ribbon in front of cameras and reporters and 37 women who had nowhere else to go, each one carrying the weight that only a mother knows, the specific terror of loving someone more than you love your own survival. The sign above the door read, "Reynolds Calabrese House." A safe place to begin again. Emma stood beside her in a dress with tiny flowers, too young to understand fully that this place bore both their names, that her mother had transformed ruin into refuge. Nicholas stood slightly back, where he belonged, not dominant but present, not managing but supporting. Carlo and Franco had returned to their usual stations, monitoring perimeter security with the attention they had once reserved for drug territories and protection rackets. Nicholas had legitimized everything. His empire was now a foundation. His threat had become a shield. A reporter asked Mia the question they always asked, "What would you say to women in situations similar to where you were a year ago?" Mia looked directly into the camera. She saw herself, the woman eating from trash bins, the woman with $5 and a foreclosure notice, the woman deciding which of her daughter's needs she could afford to prioritize. "I would say that your worst moment is not your final moment. I would say that asking for help is not weakness. I would say that you deserve safety, dignity, and love, regardless of what anyone has told you. And I would say that sometimes, one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. The camera held on her face. She was not the woman who had stood in the rain outside the Crescent Hotel. She was stronger than that woman, and softer, and somehow both at once. Behind her, Nicholas squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. The shelter would save 43 women in its first year. 43 women would rebuild their lives within its walls. The percentage of them who went on to home ownership, to employment with dignity, to relationships not rooted in desperation, would become statistics that other cities began copying. Douglas Hale would never leave San Quentin. Sophie Langford would appeal her sentence 4 times and lose each appeal. The estate of former victims would file civil suits that recovered $300,000 in total restitution. But those numbers were not the story. The story was the choice Nicholas had made on a highway in a blizzard. The story was Mia's refusal to disappear into his world. Instead, she had pulled him into hers and made it bigger, better, redeemable. The story was Emma learning that love was not transaction, that protection was not ownership, that the people who choose to stay are infinitely more valuable than the people who are obligated to. The story was simple and complicated and true. Sometimes the people we meet in our darkest moments become the light that guides us home. And sometimes the strength to change our lives comes not from inside ourselves, but from another broken person who recognizes the unbreakable thing in us and helps us remember it. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes, when we stop running from the storm, we find that someone has been standing in the darkness all along, waiting to walk us toward whatever comes next. If this story moved you, drop a like and share it with someone who needs to hear that their story isn't over yet. Subscribe for more stories about courage, redemption, and the unexpected ways love finds us. And remember, you are not defined by your worst day. You are defined by what you do next. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We will see you in the next one.